Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kerwin Henderson, a research associate here at the Justice Programs office at AU. And on behalf of the office, Monica and I thank you for attending. This is definitely a pleasure to be able to present on our survey, which has been quite an experience. We've been working on it for a while, the survey, and I'll get into it in a little bit, but the survey, we began it in March of 2015 and completed it earlier this year. So we're definitely excited to be able to tell you about what we found in the survey. And also before we get into, I also want to give kind of a shout out to Julie Baldwin, who I saw is on today, and the National Institute of Corrections, both of whom will also be doing their own surveys of veterans treatment courts and should be releasing their results somewhat soon also. Had a chance, we've spoken to Julie pretty extensively about some of her work, and like I said, found out from the National Institute of Corrections about some of their work in terms of their survey of veterans treatment courts and what they're doing just for these programs. So we're glad to be able to present our work, but also be able to collaborate with them and be able to move forward and help the field. So just to start off, just a brief history of VTCs. I assume that everyone has a good grasp of where they started, but Judge Russell, who we also worked with pretty extensively, in 2008, came up with the idea of these veterans treatment courts because he saw the need of addressing the specific needs of veterans through his drug court and through his mental health court with the number of veterans that were coming through his program, the other two programs, and decided that these standalone program for veterans would be beneficial for not only the veterans themselves but to the communities. It was from there that it blossomed and really just kind of took off, the whole veterans court paradigm, the whole movement, and it was very fitting with, I think, the overall paradigm shift of the criminal justice movement, with trying to individualize treatment and try and focus on what the specific needs of individuals in terms of rehabilitating people. And in my opinion, I think that veterans treatment courts are really, honestly, the best model, if you will, in terms of appropriately addressing the needs of individuals. And it's a model that has been reproduced, not really reproduced, but people have taken things away from it, and it's really been effective. In our office, the Justice Programs office, as technical assistance provider for not only veterans courts but for all treatment courts, we've had the pleasure of really kind of taking some ideas from veterans treatment courts and helping other treatment courts kind of implement those ideas in terms of implementing mentor programs and other certain details of these programs to help them improve and to begin addressing the specific needs of individuals. So from, I guess, the history and our work with veterans treatment courts, our office found a need to figure out what exactly makes these courts work. Our survey, when we came up with the idea, was a little bit different. If you've had a chance to look through the survey, we did exclude numbers about recidivism, not because we wanted to not show that these courts were effective, but as technical assistance providers, one of our goals is to help these courts kind of refine the ins and outs, the intricate details of these courts that all affect recidivism generally. So our survey and then corresponding report was more geared towards looking at some of those intimate details in terms of eligibility criteria and how large these courts were, where they were located, and certain details of that nature. So through the survey, we were able to really get an understanding, really a snapshot is how we termed it in the report, a snapshot of what, not only what these programs, the details of what really made these programs work, but really somewhat of a good idea of what effective programs look like, and really where some of the needs are for a lot of veterans treatment courts and where they can and should improve. So. We have a map here of the veterans treatment courts around the country, broken down by each state. If you want to follow up with either Monica or myself, we can send you a complete list. I think we have it in the appendix also of the full report. But at last glance, at the time of the survey, there was over 300, I think around 350 veterans treatment courts, 224, excuse me, 224. And at last glance, recently, I think there were well over 400, and that includes not only the courts, veterans treatment courts themselves, but also courts that have a standing track, or treatment courts that have a standing veterans treatment track in them. So, like I said, if you want to follow with either Monica or myself about receiving this map and some of the information that we use, feel free to do that.
Hi everyone, my name is Monica and I'm also a research specialist here at the Justice Programs Office. So Kerwin and I are going to go ahead and go back and forth on this, and if you have the report in front of you, we'll be kind of following along in the order that it is in the report, just kind of highlighting some of the areas that we found most interesting and most relevant. And as Kerwin said, as far as the map, we actually do have if you go to our website, we do have a landing page with a PDF copy of the report, an executive summary, a list of the veterans treatment course. The map is up there, our webinars that we've done, just a variety of resources for anyone who's interested. So back in March 2015, we decided to send out this survey that was developed with the help of a number of individuals involved with veterans treatment courts. We sent it to around 1,500 drug treatment courts and asked them if they had a veterans court or if they knew of veterans courts, if they could send the survey along to those individuals who could respond to these questions. So we knew at the time that there were around 220 operating veterans treatment courts, and we received responses from about 328 drug courts. And of those responses, 129 were from veterans treatment courts, so about a 58% response rate. And so here's more of a breakdown of the responding programs. So as you can see, the majority were from veterans treatment courts operating as their own entity, but there were 23 that were operating as a track within an adult drug court, and an additional 9 that were operating as a track within a mental health court program, giving us that 129 number, with 35 indicated that they were in the planning stages of creating a veterans treatment court. And just as a note, so we did receive responses from 129 programs. Those responses were not always full responses. Some answers were not filled out, and so you'll see throughout the report that the numbers kind of change based on the number of responses to each question. And there were actually, in the survey that was sent out, we had quite a few questions. When we received the responses back and looked through them, we decided to kind of leave out some of the questions that were maybe not properly worded or didn't give us like a clear indication of what the response really was from the court. So we tried to focus on the questions that had the most relevance to the field. And we have also included a number of resources in the appendix of the report. So there is case law and statutes in there, but we also have a list of resources, a list of the veterans treatment courts who did respond to the report. So it was some really helpful things in the appendix if you have a chance to take a look at that. And here is the age of the veterans treatment courts that responded. So as you can see, about 76% of the responding programs were less than 5 years old at the time of the survey, and about 24% of the programs had been implemented in 2014 and 2015. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Kerwin to talk about the programs.
Yeah, thank you. So the programs, it's one thing, like I said, we're technical assistance providers for all treatment courts. And one of the things that we found is that there have been a lot of questions regarding, how long should, each phase of each program, of our program be, whether or not, the phases of our program should coincide with treatment phases and whatnot. So we included the questions about the phases of the specific Veterans Treatment Court program in terms of how long the phases were. As you can see, 2/3 of the programs that responded, at least to this question, indicated that their programs are between 12 and 24 months in length, which really fits in somewhat with the best practice standards. Standard 5 of the best practice standards indicates that the best outcomes are achieved when participants spend between 9 and 12 months in treatment. However, there's been some research that kind of suggests that there might be somewhat of a diminishing effect for participants that stay in treatment for too long, but for the most part, for the programs that we surveyed, they were all hitting in between that 9 and 12 month, with a lot of them hitting over the 12-month mark, but a lot of them were hitting within that range. So, next slide. We also looked at program capacity. And 41% of the responding programs to this question indicated that the program capacity range between 20 and 40 participants, while 20% of the programs listed the capacity as being between 50 and 60 participants. So, we did a lot of different reasons, I guess, why the courts have varied in their sizes. I mean, due to the specific area of the country or the state that the states that they're located in, but for the most part, over half of the programs that responded to this question indicated that they hoped to expand and increase the capacity of their courts, which is something that coincides with what we see when going into the field in terms of programs looking for additional funding to expand and devising strategies to attract more veterans into their courts. Some of the services that were shown that programs provide, housing, overwhelming amount of programs that responded to this question indicated that they provided housing for their participants. As well as a number of programs indicated that education was provided, and I was somewhat surprised. I think we were all somewhat surprised about the availability of MAT that programs provided for their participants in terms of providing access to MAT, medically assisted treatment. One of the areas that we have kind of focused on in providing technical assistance is trying to advocate for alumni groups to kind of give that element of aftercare for a lot of participants that graduate from Veterans Treatment Courts. A lot of the veterans, at least from what we understand and what we've heard, they see it as another strength for them to kind of latch on to after graduating for the program, and a way for them to kind of give back to the programs. So as you can see, only 16% of the respondents indicated that they had an alumni group, and we're hoping that that number will expand extensively moving forward. And of course, the hallmark portion of these programs is the mentor program, the mentor component of the Veterans Treatment Courts. And unfortunately, not every Veterans Treatment Court has an established mentor program. A number of programs that we've worked with have been in the implementation phase of trying to start a mentor program, but the respondents to this question indicated, 85% of them indicated that they had an established mentor program, with 60% of those indicating that they require their participants to have a mentor, and another 49% programs indicating that they required their mentors to undergo a background check to make sure that their mentors were squared away, if you will. And then 47% required their mentors to undergo specific training. We actually have online archived a webinar on the role of mentors in veterans treatment courts that Jack O'Connor, yes, sorry, blanking for a second, Jack O'Connor, and then Gregory Coker, who's a mentor coordinator in, I think, the Riverside, California area. And in that webinar, they discuss not only what it takes to maintain a mentor program, but also give a few ideas, a few suggestions on where to find mentors, which is an issue or something that we've found has been difficult for a lot of programs, is that they don't have a mentor program because they haven't identified enough people to run the program. So if you have a chance or would like more information, again, you can follow with either Monica or myself, and we can point you in the right direction.
Okay, and now over to Veterans Treatment Court processes. So just touching on some of the key points in the process related to eligibility, screening and assessment, staffings and hearings, and that type of thing. So as far as eligibility, we found that 60% of programs indicated that veterans with dishonorable discharges would be eligible for participation, which is very encouraging because often this discharge status, these dishonorable, other than honorable status, can really affect veterans very negatively, and so they may be most in need of help. And then we also found over 70% of programs indicated that they would admit veterans with each of the following types of charges. So we have theft, drug possession, DUI, forgery, and domestic violence. And then a majority of programs also indicated that they do allow veterans in with a prior violent felony or misdemeanor conviction, and that they do admit individuals with prior offenses. Other factors that were noted to affect eligibility were primarily residency in the jurisdiction in which the Veterans Treatment Court operates or pending charges. And we found that with eligibility criteria, it's often best to have pretty simple, clearly articulated criteria so that it's clear who can be in the program and that anyone who is eligible has a chance to participate and receive the treatment that they need and that they deserve. And then as far as screening and assessment, we didn't ask too many detailed questions about this, but it is important to note that Veterans Treatment Courts have begun to implement screening processes at multiple points in the court process. So as you can see here, the majority indicate that they screen at jail pre-trial or at the time of arraignment or at the time of a probation violation, but we also have large numbers indicating that they do it at the time of arrest through self-identification or just at each court hearing, the judge makes an effort to ask the individual if they are a veteran. Some issues that come up with this is that many veterans don't self-identify, so some courts have found creative ways around this, modifying pretrial interview and other related forms to add a question regarding veteran status is one option. Other courts have implemented procedures with their local jail to review inmate status daily, and other courts refer to the Service Member Civil Relief Act website to verify potential veteran status. And in this regard, your Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist can also be a valuable tool in helping you to identify veterans. In regards to assessments, 84% of programs indicated that they conduct a risk needs assessment, although of the programs that did say they conduct this assessment, under half reported that they separate participants based on their level of risk and need. And so it's important that, you know, in conducting these assessments that we're really focusing on those high-risk, high-need individuals And if the court is allowing in, you know, moderate risk, low risk, that they are separating the participants so that treatment is geared towards that level of risk and need. And screening and assessment tasks related to treatment planning were largely reported to be done either by the VA or the local treatment provider. On to staffings and hearings. Thankfully, luckily, about 100% of programs indicated that they conduct staffings. The individuals who most regularly attend these staffings are the judge, the coordinator, local treatment representative, defense counsel, prosecutor, and the VJO specialist. And we really want all of those people there at the staffing, so that was very encouraging to find that. And then as far as hearings, we had programs indicating that in the initial phases, they usually have the participants going to hearings weekly, and as the participant progresses through the program, through the phases, 80% of programs indicated that in the final phase, the participant only has to attend hearings monthly. In regards to termination criteria, so we provided them with these categories, and these are the percentages of programs that indicated that 75% indicated new arrest would be, could potentially be grounds for termination, new conviction, non-appearance at treatment, non-appearance at court hearings. But overall, in the responses, and many programs provided narrative responses to this question, and they indicated that rather than relying on any one of these things, they only terminated a participant when there was a demonstrated pattern of persistent non-compliant behavior, and that they attempted to use therapeutic adjustments and re-engage the participant in treatment before resorting to termination. So that's very promising as well. And then in regards to graduation, we have 89% of programs who have a minimum time period of participation that's required, and similarly, over 60% indicate a required time frame for sobriety. So you can see that on the chart to your right, with most of the programs requiring that the individual be sober between 6 to 18 months. Other requirements for graduation, the programs listed were performance of community service. Often there's a designated number of hours that are listed and that the participant is made aware of when they enter the program that they need to complete. And often this is divided into phases as well. So X amount of hours in phase 1 and so on. Payment of program fees, enrollment in an educational program, and or obtaining employment are often other requirements for graduation. And some of the benefits of graduating from a Veterans Treatment Court, we found that 81% of programs indicated that they will dismiss or seal the criminal record for the current offense. Unfortunately, only 15% of programs can dismiss or seal records for prior offenses. And we also looked a little bit at military discharge status upgrades. So we found that 50 programs said that they do make an effort to assist participants in upgrading their discharge status for those veterans who did not receive an honorable discharge. Unfortunately, those programs also indicated that their success at doing this was very, very low. So there is an alternative to the discharge upgrade. There's a character of discharge review, which can potentially provide the veteran with VA benefits, except for access to the GI Bill. And if you want to learn more about that, we did conduct a webinar on that with Major Evan Simone, which is on our website, and kind of walks you through the process of helping the veteran to get that upgrade, and really helps them with medical benefits and all sorts of things. So it's really something to look into to help them on their path to recovery.
So getting into more of the participants of these programs, over 3/4 of the programs that responded to this set of questions indicated that that their participants were mostly white. And among the overall population of U.S. veterans, which kind of coincides with I guess the overall population of U.S. veterans, which is almost 82% of all veterans, and 67% of all post-9/11 vets are white. However, the issue with I guess and I wouldn't say an issue, but one of the needs that we found is better methods of collecting data for these programs. One of the issues that we had as an office was in terms of getting through the data and collecting the data, that, you know, I guess for our benefit, it wasn't as readily available as we would like. I think moving forward, you know, as these courts begin to expand, that we'll see much better data collected on just the various demographics of participants, and we'll be able to make a lot of recommendations in terms of eligibility criteria and targeting, and come up with I guess really good ideas, unique ideas of how to get some of those people that we might have missed in terms of getting them into the courts. Regarding participant gender and age, the data that we collected on gender, participant gender, was based on, so I can get to the next slide, was based on 96 reporting programs, responding programs. As you can see, that males, by and large, represent the population of veterans treatment courts. And regarding age, that data was based on 91 responding programs. And as you can see, that the age group of 26 to 35 overwhelmingly represented the population of a lot of these courts, which for us as technical assistance providers, you know, one of the things that we recommend is for programs to be cognizant of their eligibility criteria, and thoroughly going and vetting their criteria to make sure that no one's being missed, so that those that are underrepresented, you know, that they can also be represented in these programs, as a lot of them also need help and are in the justice system. But as we found out, you know, specifically for older veterans, the Vietnam vets, that a lot of times they don't like to identify. So there's and that's covered again in Major Simone's webinar, that making or allowing, you know, those justice-involved vets, creating an environment for them to identify, so that they can get into these programs and get the benefits that they deserve. So moving on, judges and coordinators. 84% of the veterans treatment courts that responded to these questions indicated that they had one judge assigned, and only 13 of them indicated that 2 or more judges were assigned to oversee the court. Almost 1 in 4 had a full-time judge, and then 93% of the reporting programs indicated that they had a coordinator. A lot of times what we found out is that the term coordinator is I guess, fluid, that it's sometimes a coordinator, sometimes a case manager, just depending on how it's termed. So we believe that 90%, 93% actually may be somewhat larger, somewhat higher, just depending on how those that answer this question responded. Next slide. In terms of prior experience, overwhelmingly, judges and coordinators have prior experience working in problem-solving courts, such as a drug court or mental health court. Over half of the prosecutors that were identified, and as well as public defenders and probation staff, VJOs and treatment providers also indicated that they had worked in a treatment court previously. In addition to their prior experience with problem-solving courts, 89% of the respondents to this question indicated that they had training on Veterans Treatment Court principles, and about 2/3 of those of these respondents said that they had been trained prior to launching the court. We also asked about prior military experience within those that work in the courts, and respondents indicated that mentors and law enforcement representatives were most likely to have prior military experience. And not all the respondents answered all the questions regarding military experience, but one of the things that we kind of found surprising is how many judges actually had prior military experience, which makes sense in terms of their dedication to helping their fellow vets out. But a lot of judges, a high number of judges in comparison had military experience. Okay, and now on to coordination between the Department of Veterans Affairs and Veterans Treatment Courts. So we started out just by asking if the VA was sharing info with the Veterans Treatment Courts, and an overwhelming 92% of programs indicate that information is shared. There were some qualifiers to this, though. There are some factors that inhibited the free flow of information, as well as how complete this information was. So in regards to treatment information, oftentimes some programs indicated that they were just getting verbal reports every now and then instead of regular written reports. And we really recommend two things. First is to really have your Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist involved and help with this coordination, but also oftentimes establishing memorandums of understanding, MOUs, with the VA so that everybody's on the same page as to what the expectations are. That can often really facilitate the coordination between these two entities. And then the other area that we asked about in relation to the VA was drug testing. And so we had a number of courts indicate that the VA does do their drug testing. But there are some caveats to note with this, and Sean Clark from the VA really provided some clarification as to why this is. So drug testing conducted by the VA is different from drug testing conducted by probation or any other criminal justice entity. So as you'll see, the VA, it's relatively infrequent, often unobserved. It is random, but the results may take in excess of 48 hours to be returned to the court. So for those courts that, for Veterans Treatment Courts, we really do need it to be frequent, observed, and have a quick turnaround of results. And so these courts may want to look into utilizing probation to do their drug testing, or looking into if their treatment provider could do it, just kind of looking into an entity that could be more responsive to their needs. In addition to surveying the programs about how many of them have partnered with other organizations, we actually asked for the names of some of those organizations to kind of provide a resource list to programs who may have not identified specific programs or wanted some ideas about identifying different programs. So we received names of over 75 military organizations that programs have partnered with. And the thing about partnering with many of these organizations is that a lot of them also serve as programs, their fiscal entity, to accept donations and funding on behalf of these veterans programs. So depending on the state, a lot of programs have opportunities to also partner with these community programs, and some of these military organizations to also have them serve as that entity. In addition to the 75 military organizations that we have in the appendix, the VA's website also has a list of various veterans organizations that could be useful in looking to partner and helping to create awareness about the program, and also, like I said, about regarding community support. Some of the private organizations that these programs are partnered with include Volunteers of America, AmeriCorps, Supplemental Nutrition Programs, local universities, and United Way. We asked about advisory committees, programs about who was on their advisory, if they had an advisory committee, who was on their advisory committees, The membership on the committees, it was all over the place. It was very wide-ranging, from people from the justice system to local public health systems and other community entities such as the Chamber of Congress and various faith organizations. And almost half of the respondents indicated that their committees meet quarterly, with some respondents indicating that meetings occur annually to once a week. I think being in the field and being able to talk to a lot of programs, it's really based on need in terms of how often their advisory committees meet. Sometimes, specific entities on the drug court team take on a lot of the responsibilities of going out and seeking funding and seeking support in the community. And then there's a lot of programs that have advisory committees that are very heavily involved in their programs. Some of the functions of these committees included assisting with coordination of services, acquisition of services, reviewing standards of practice, strategic planning, and then just working generally to strengthen the program's partnerships.
We also asked programs to let us know what issues they faced when implementing a Veterans Treatment Court, and we got quite a few responses, but most of them seem to fall into what you see here on the screen. So one of the major ones really was the lack of systematic procedures for identifying eligible veterans, especially at the time of arrest. And so we do encourage you to look into kind of implementing procedures at different points in the court process so that you can really try to get that whole world of veterans who may be eligible. Inadequate resources for ancillary services, so that includes housing, employment, education, transportation. These are all issues that these courts are facing. Difficulties communicating with the VA and obtaining necessary information and records. Difficulties coordinating service delivery between the VA and community providers, and in this regard I would also encourage the development of an MOU so that the VA, the Veterans Treatment Court, and the local treatment provider are all on the same page, and that really is for the benefit of the veterans so that they're getting the best treatment possible. Courts also talked about lack of local buy-in from court-involved individuals and the community, so some hesitation on the part of judges or prosecutors or different individuals, politicians, or even just members of the community. And it really takes showing them what these courts can do and showing them success stories to get them to buy in, because Veterans Treatment Courts are a pretty easy sell. So you just have to really work to get people to understand what they're doing. Issues related to the functioning of the Veterans Treatment Court team. So this included staff turnover, the need for continuous training, coordination and sharing of information between team members, role definition and responsibilities, clarifying those roles for everybody on the team, and the need for team building opportunities to make sure you have a strong team and are able to do the best work that you can without burning out. Lack of funding, which is an issue for all of the treatment courts, really. And there's federal funding opportunities, local opportunities, but really getting some of that local buy-in will help with the funding. And then the last one was developing and maintaining a mentor program. And as Kerwin mentioned, we do have a webinar on that, and Jack O'Connor and Greg Coker really provide some good suggestions on developing and maintaining a mentor program. So we recommend you take a look at that if that's an issue that you're struggling with. And then we asked about technical assistance needs, so divided into training needs and technical assistance needs. So specifically on training, these courts indicated that they needed more training on post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, military culture, female veterans, medication-assisted treatment, families of veterans, which is, a topic that really is important to address the families, because they're under quite a bit of strain themselves, and they need support and they need resources. So really trying to understand what the families are experiencing and what would be most helpful to them is definitely an area that should be looked at more closely. And then what are the most effective treatment options for veterans? For an individual dealing with PTSD and TBI or MST, for an individual dealing with all of these things, what works best? The courts indicated that they would really like training on that topic. And then as far as technical assistance, these were the primary areas that the courts noted. So we have data collection and management, which is really most of these are applicable to problem-solving courts in general. So ensuring the courts wanted to know what data to be collecting, how to manage it, and then following from that, how to conduct and structure program evaluations, how to do a process evaluation and outcome evaluation to ensure that they are doing a good job in their courts and that they're going to continue to be successful. Identifying eligible veterans came up again, implementing a systematic process to do so, developing a mentor program, determining proper incentives and sanctions, and really one of the key words that comes up lately in problem-solving courts is the need for therapeutic adjustments. So if there's a relapse or something of that nature, working with the treatment provider to understand how you can adjust the individual's treatment for the best results. Conducting risk needs assessments, and then also knowing what to do with those assessments when they're conducted. So we should be using those assessments to guide their treatment, and we should be conducting them regularly. And we also did just conduct a webinar, I believe it was last week, on risk needs assessments. And so if you do have any technical assistance needs around that, we recommend you take a look at that webinar as well. And then just sustainability, which is really something that all of these courts have to confront. But if you're doing a good job, if you're helping, then it should be pretty easy for you to make a strong case to funders to continue funding your court. And I believe that that is it. We will just say that we do have hard copies of the report, so if you would like a hard copy, you can definitely email us and provide us with your address, and we'd be happy to send one to you. We do have the report on our website as well. And I think at this time we'll just go ahead and if anyone has any questions, feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
Any and all comments would be much appreciated. As I mentioned, there are the National Institute and then Professor Baldwin are also working on their surveys, and we work with them closely. I'm sure they would appreciate any comments that you have, any suggestions. We welcome those now.
So it looks like we have a question. One attendee writes, was there any effort to see if MAT use is increasing with veterans courts?
So this was a one-time survey. I believe, Kerwin, I'll let you take this a little bit because I know that Kerwin has talked more extensively with Julie Baldwin at NIC, and they're conducting their own research into these courts, and so perhaps their research could let us know if it's increasing. Is that correct?
Right. So, yeah, because it was a survey that we conducted in 2015, we definitely would need to follow up to see what increases in terms of availability and uses of MAT have occurred throughout these programs. My assumption is that it has increased in terms of use and availability, given what's happened federally in terms of the federal government kind of getting behind, a little bit more behind MAT, and then with Vivitrol and everything coming out. So my assumption is that it has increased, but we're definitely going to follow up in looking at the different programs to see how much it has increased.
Great. We have another question about risk and needs assessments and instruments. And the question is, do you have any information on how many veterans treatment courts use the risk assessments and which instruments are most commonly found within the veterans treatment courts?
We didn't really identify which risk assessment instruments the different programs were using. It was more so from a number standpoint. I think, Monica, do you?
Yeah, from a number standpoint, we had 94 programs respond to the question on conducting 79 programs that screen for risk and need. But we did not probe more deeply into what instruments are used, and that really is something that could be, that would be very interesting to know, and is something that we encourage other researchers to look into when conducting their surveys.
Another question from an attendee, he asks, what incentives were found most successful for veterans? Do you have any insight on that from the survey?
From the survey, I don't think we can really speak on what was most successful. I think we briefly speak about the types of incentives that were used in terms of praise, looking for praise and fish bowls, things of that nature. I think that would somewhat be hard to track. I think it definitely depends on the I guess how the veteran responds to what praise. But that's one of the things that we didn't really capture in our survey, which was the most effective method of incentive, rather.
And a similar question about data management tools and case management systems. Do you have any idea which ones Veterans Treatment Courts are using?
So we didn't have this in the survey, but I know a large majority of programs use their statewide systems. A lot of the states have required that they use the systems. Outside of that, a number of different programs actually use the Buffalo Treatment Courts system, which we actually have copies of and can forward that to anyone who's interested. But the Buffalo MIS is widely used for a lot of the programs, just in terms of it's a program that's based through Access, Microsoft Access, so it's easily, you can customize it and address to address the specific needs of your program. So.
Great, thank you so much. And if you had any questions that were not answered from this webinar or during this Q&A session, please feel free to email the Justice Programs Office through the contact info found on the screen. And as was previously mentioned, you can find an electronic copy of the report on our website. So we encourage you to go to our website for more resources too. Thank you, Monica and Kerwin, for your presentation. And this webinar has been recorded, and we will be sending it out later this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.